This week's Parsha introduces us to those creatures that are kosher to eat and those that are not allowed to be eaten according to the Torah. We have an introduction to the laws of kashrus previously in the posuk that I discussed with you, Lo Savash El Gedi B'Chalevi Mo. So that already appears in Parshas Mishpatim, in Chumash Shmos, and that's the origin of the separation of dairy and meat, according to the halacha, and how it expanded from the literal interpretation of cooking a young goat in its mother's milk, how it came to having separate sinks in our time. But this week's parsha deals with the animals, the creatures, and the rule for behemoth, for domesticated animals, is that it has to chew its cud, it has to be able to regurgitate the food that it originally digested, and that its hooves are split. It has to have both of those qualifications. If it has only one of them, then it is not acceptable. So, for instance, the pig has split hooves, but it does not regurgitate its food. And camels regurgitate the food, but they don't have split hooves. So it's restricted pretty much to the bovine family, bulls and cows, goats, sheep, and also included are animals that are not domesticated, such as an ayol, the wild ram, or tzvi, which is a deer, venison, are also kosher. The Torah mentions them as being kosher. Just as an aside, the heter that we have to drink milk. Milk is something that's ayotze min achai, so it's aver min achai. So what's the heter to drink cow's milk, that we drink it? So the Gemara darshans that because the Torah said Eretz Zavas Cholav Udvosh, Eretz Yisrael is a country that overflows with Cholav Udvosh. So Cholav is milk, so the Torah is materit. The Torah wouldn't give a compliment there to Israel on a food that's not edible. And dvash, so dvash in the Torah means usually date honey, which is what would be zovas cholav v'dvosh, that our country over, because it's the date palm is very prominent here. It's a staple. Dvash, as we know it, is also honey from bees. And the problem with honey from bees, again, bees are not a kosher insect. And we have a rule called ayotzi min tomei. Anything that comes from something which is not kosher is itself not kosher. So if that is the case, then how do we have honey from bees? So the Gemara discusses it. And the Gemara says a anatomical observation of bees is that the honey is not made, so to speak, inside the digestive system of the bee, but it is rather a secretion from a sac, an outside sac that the bee has on its body. And therefore, because of that, it is not considered to come from the bee itself, and therefore the honey would be permissible and is used as kosher food. We have, I remember from my years in the OU, we had always a question about, there's a glaze called resinous glaze that companies use to coat candy, like so the candy should be shiny and smooth, M&Ms, stuff like that. So how do they get it to be shiny like that? So there's an insect that lives in the jungles of Central and South America. It's called the lac, L-A-C. And the natives harvest this insect off of the trees. And this insect also has a external sac to it. And when you squeeze that sac, the liquid that comes out becomes the lac becomes what it is. That's why we have shellac, for instance, which is a chemical that's used to polish things. So that comes from the lac. So too, resinous glaze comes from that. We had a tshuva from Rabbi Feinstein and from others that it has the same halacha like bees, and therefore it's not over ayotzi min atome, but it's an extraneous thing. It's just that this insect carries it with it, but it's not part of the insect. So anyway, so milk and honey, that's all permissible. What about the Torah discusses fish as well? So the Torah has a requirement, snapir v'kaskeses, fins and scales. The Gemara already says that anything that has scales automatically has fins. And so then the Gemara is concerned as to why the Torah had to mention fins, etc. That's a different inyan. But scales is really what makes it. So, for instance, the sea mammals, turtles, oysters, whales, dolphins, etc., all of those are not kosher because, first of all, they're mammals and they are not fish, and they do not have scales. Their skin is that of mammals, not of scales.
How about sharks?
Sharks also don't have scales. But what is interesting is there were disputes for many years. They've all been settled by now. For instance, regarding certain types of tuna. So the tuna is a fish. It's not a mammal, it's a fish. It's a big fish. Some of the tunas are gigantic. And there is a species of tuna, it's called skipjack. The expensive tuna is albacore, the white tuna. But the cheaper tuna is from this type of tuna called skipjack. Now, the skipjack is an interesting fish because as long as it is in the water, it has scales, as kaskasi. But if you take it out of the water, it loses all of its scales, and then its skin becomes smooth. Now, the industry likes that because then they don't have to descale the fish. But the question is whether or not kaskasim that fall off on dry land when the fish is out, is that the kaskasas that the Torah said that you're allowed to. So for 2-3 decades there was a dispute about this, but that dispute has been resolved again. I don't think there's any posek anymore that holds that that it's a problem, and that the skipjack and most of the tuna that's sold, both in the United States and here in Israel, is from skipjack. The albacore is relatively rare compared to the skipjack. That's why the albacore costs more. And there aren't that many. You have to realize there are millions of tuna that are caught every year. It's an enormous industry. And therefore there have to be millions of tuna born every year. And it's really one of the great wonders of nature, how this fish is able to reproduce itself in such numbers that it's always available, and it's a staple food all over the world, everywhere. The other problem that arose with tuna is the fact that the dolphins swim with the tuna. For some reason, so the tuna comes in enormous herds. I don't know, schools of fish, really hundreds of thousands in one place. And when the industrialized trawlers that catch these fish, so they have enormous nets that are 3-4 miles in size. And the fish they all swim into the net, and when the weight in the net reaches a certain amount, it closes and they pull it up on the ship, and they have all of the fish in it. So when they catch tuna, they also catch dolphin. They always catch dolphin, because they swim together. The dolphin is not kosher. So then there is always a fear that somehow it would get mixed up. So there we have again modern society. Every fish is looked at by a government inspector and is graded. There's Sug Aleph, Sug Bet, Sug Gimel. There are fish that are damaged, that are thrown away. There are fish that are diseased. So every fish is looked at. And therefore it's the government that certifies that that it's a tuna and not dolphin, because they looked at every fish to see that that is the case. And it's the same thing regarding sardines. Most of the sardines used to come from Norway, King Oscar and others. Every sardine is looked at individually. There are millions of sardines, but they're not looked at individually, and they're packed by hand. Women that work at it, and they're the ones that pack the cans, and they get paid per can that they pack. It's really a remarkable thing to see. So all of that is included in what we have, Snapir V'Kaskasas, which teaches us which fish can be eaten and which fish cannot be eaten. All rumors to the contrary notwithstanding, gefilte fish do not grow carrots on their back. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashi Omer Otza Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Es Yisrael Leficha Chir B'Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chaved Zaman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.